Process challenged as IEA calls on the Administrator General to take charge.
No, it is the Administrator General who takes charge, not the Vice President. It would be important for him to take charge of this process because he is an autonomous, independent person. He has, the authority under the law to do this.
We hear from the transition team as it begins work to ensure a smooth transition to the new government.
Top Story with Evans Mensah.
Top Story is brought to you by Bond Financial Services, your success, our passion, Belacqua Mineral Water, the new generation mineral water, as well as myjoyonline.com. We are live from the Malta TV studios here, also live on Joy 99.7 FM. The position of Vice President Mr. Arthur as chairman of the government's transition team is being challenged. The stance of the Institute of Economic Affairs is that it is the Administrator General who must chair the transition team and not the Vice President. The President on Tuesday appointed Mr. and Mr. Arthur to chair the 24-member transition team to manage the transfer of power to the new government. The committee today started work establishing its subcommittees under the supervision of the Vice President. But the IEA, which spearheaded the drafting of the law guiding the process, says the Vice President cannot be leading the process. The Institute's head, Madame Jean Mensah, explains.
The law sets up, that new agency to be in charge of transitions. And that agency, the Presidential Estates Unit, is run and headed by the Administrator General. And it is the Administrator General that is in charge of obtaining all the handing over notes from the officers that I mentioned. I think another area that, the Administrator General could focus on is the stock taking of national assets. And we believe that this will ensure accountability and transparency in the handling of public assets and state assets. And he's enjoined to take inventory and stock of assets at the private and official residence of the President, the Vice President, as well as the Ministers of State.
With your understanding of the law, what do you make of the leadership of the transition team by the Vice President? Because I hear you talk a lot about the Administrator General.
He may be having to report directly to the President, I'm not sure. But per the law, it is the Administrator General who takes charge, not the Vice President. And I think one thing that I also read was the establishment of an advisory council. And that really becomes necessary when you have an outgoing government handing over to an incoming, a totally new government. And the advisory council is made up of members from both sides. And that council really is a council that deals with disputes, not the transition, so to speak.
In this particular instance where we don't have a new government, so to speak, as in a different party haven't been elected, but it's the same old government that has been re-elected, do we need the advisory council or not, as far as the law is concerned?
No, I don't think so. As far as the law is concerned, you don't need an advisory council because the council must be made up of both sides, not one side.
The central question for me will be, where is the Administrator General in all this?
Exactly, and I think that it would be important for him to take charge of this process because he is an autonomous, independent person, and he's been appointed by the President to manage this transition. He has, the authority under the law to do this, and he has the tenure as a Justice of the Court of Appeal, and therefore he's granted, security of tenure. And therefore we are expecting to see him taking charge of this process.
And we're expecting a statement from the transition team shortly. We understand we can expect it around 6 p.m. It will be on other issues because indeed today the team has been meeting, establishing subcommittees. Also, we'll be trying to put those questions raised by the IEA to them. But I'm joined by one individual who understands this process and indeed was also instrumental in passing this particular act that is guiding the process. I'm talking about former Chief of Staff in the Rawlings regime, Nana Tudadzi. Thank you very much, sir, for your time here on Top Story, Mr. Tudadzi. What is your understanding of this particular law when it comes to who leads the process?
Well, thank you very much. I think that it is interesting times we live in when a new law that just come into force actually comes into being in reality. The exceptional circumstances we find ourselves today is comes in two areas. One is the fact that the same president is succeeding himself, same government is succeeding itself. Secondly, that the presidential ethics unit or the Office of Administrator General has just come into being. It's not yet fully institutionalized. Having regard to these two challenges, you will find out that the law in its perfect form will not cannot immediately be translated word for word, as it were, in reality. Under the law, there are two major establishments which come into play. One is the transition team itself. And then the law also sets up an institution to be created. That is the Office of the Administrator General, that's the Presidential Ethics Unit itself. Now, this second body, that's the Presidential Ethics Unit, as I said, it's new. It's yet to take full force, even though an Administrator General, I believe, has been appointed. Now, under the law, an incumbent president and the incoming president jointly chair the transitional team. That is what the law says. As I said, it's an exceptional situation where we don't have an incoming president. So what happens? And I'm saying the transitional team is totally different, as it were, from the institution. The transitional team is a body that comes into play, to force, and then operates for a period, and then it lapses, as it were.
But from IEA's understanding, the Administrator General must lead the entire process. They indeed specify the things that he should be doing. Apart from that unit, the estates unit, they must also oversee the swearing in of the new parliament, for example, and going forward about the assets of the state. Also, he must keep an inventory of them, and all those committees that we are hearing today was being established. The Administrator General, we know he's been appointed. The question is, why don't you allow him to be the person leading the process?
Well, certainly the Administrator General cannot chair the transitional team. You understand? If in the original state, or where you have an incumbent coming in, and then the incumbent being on, and then the incoming president in, well, how can you place somebody who is in the nature of a civil service to preside over a meeting being co-chaired by the two presidents?
My understanding of the law is that it's the reason why he is specifically described as an independent person who goes into this process without any affiliation to both sides.
Absolutely. But I'm saying that the functions of an Administrator General are clearly set out in the law. You understand? His functions are clearly set out in the law. He takes over the running of the Presidential Estate Unit, and it's clearly defined. And this is different from the process of transition itself. This is the point I'm trying to make. The transition is a short-term measure. that comes into place where you bring in the incumbent and then the incoming president and then it's a team of ministers and appointees to interface. And then, there's a process of political handing over. That's a process of political handing over. When that is done, the ultimate business of running the day-to-day transition will fall in the laps of the Administrator General. So really, that you cannot superimpose one on the other. There are two functions performed by two different bodies. One is a political transition, which sees the incoming and then the incumbent face off. The handing over runs through a period. Now, the functions of the transition team essentially is very limited. We have the inauguration subcommittee. There will be the government machinery subcommittee, and then there is the presidency subcommittee. They deal with specific issues. Like the inauguration subcommittee, we dealing with matters pertaining to swearing in and all that.
And I must,
the government, yes.
And I must quickly indicate that we are hoping to shortly speak to Madame Jean Mensah, who heads the IEA again. But the question I must ask you is, you mentioned it earlier, that really in this case, we don't have a typical transition in the typical sense of handing over from one administration to the next. Technically, it's a still government. Do we need a transition? Do we need to go through this very elaborate process when indeed it's the same government, handing over power to itself?
Yes, this is a question that has been asked over and over and over again. Absolutely. A transition does not necessarily involve one government, one outside government, as it were, to another. You can have an internal transition. I remember that in 1992, for instance, the PNDC, had an internal, as it were, arrangement, and we had a transition as it handed over to Mr. Jerry Rawlings, now as President Rawlings. That's transition from Chairman Rawlings to Mr. Rawlings. The point about it is that the new government is coming into being. That new government does not necessarily carry lock, stick, and barrel, as they say, all the staff, everything, from the past. There's a new team that will come on board. And that new team must take over from the previous team. And that process of handing over is what we term the transition.
Okay, thank you, sir, for your time. That's Nana Tudadzi, very instrumental in that in the passage of that particular act that is guiding the process towards a transition. But we still don't have Madame Jean Mensah on the line. We're hoping to get her back to try and explain what the position really is. I'm sure you heard Nana Tudadzi make the point that when it comes to the transition team itself, it's okay to have the vice president lead it. And you can restrict the other issues to the Administrator General. Is that really the position? Because the IEA, indeed, as you know, drafted that particular act that eventually passed in Parliament. So we will stay with this particular transition issue on Newsnight in 15 minutes because the other angles we want to explore. We're expecting a statement from the team itself because they've been meeting today for the first time, trying to establish other subcommittees, etc., as we move closer to January 7 with the inauguration. You want to stay with us for that. My name is Evans Mensah. Top Story is brought to you by Bond Financial Services. Your success, our passion. Belacqua Mineral Water, the new generation mineral water, as well as MyJoyOnline.com. My name is Evans Mensah. Starting right now, it's Reporter Sango on TV.